Okay, so getting into Titans Made in Manhattan, this story is amazing. But this is actually a story really for like a lot of you old Titans fans. For those of you guys who have been reading Teen Titans for years and years and years and years, especially in classic DC before the New 52. And the reason why is because this actually takes a lot of the concepts from Titans Hunt and then expands on them. For those of you guys who don't know, when New 52 launched, the Titans were non-existent. And that was kind of a big deal for a lot of people because the Titans was basically the grown-up Teen Titans. It was the original Teen Titans team, plus or minus a member or two, that had basically grown up and formed a team of their own just called the Titans. And then it set the stage for a new generation of Teen Titans to be brought in to craft their own little niche in the realm of superheroes. But when the New 52 launched, you had a reiteration of the Teen Titans that not very many people liked, and you didn't have the Titans. And so the question that people had was, what's going on? Where are the Titans? And so what DC did is they wrote a story called Titans Hunt that was designed to go back and basically say, here is the story of what happened to the Titans, here's the story of what happened to the Teen Titans, yada, 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 you know, kind of bring those things in and add that stuff to the fold. Now, it was really like a limited run, and it was designed to be a story kind of told in the past and sort of expand on a few things. But one of the things that it did is it actually introduced or kind of reintroduced in the New 52 the characters of Karen Beecher and Malcolm Duncan. Now, the reason why they matter is because of the fact that they were members of the Teen Titans, even if only for a limited capacity, before the New 52. And they don't play a wildly significant role in the overarching DC landscape, but they do play a pretty important role here. And again, this is really just designed by DC for the purpose of kind of going back and touching on a lot of these old things that were never really expanded on in the realm of the New 52, kind of reminding, you know, traditional, you know, classic DC fans that a lot of that classic DC stuff is still there, and it's basically being reworked in a way that they remember it. Now, the reason why I say that is because of the fact that this initially picks up with Malcolm Duncan and Karen Beecher at a place called Meta Solutions. Now, Malcolm Duncan basically had an ability that I believe dealt with sound manipulation. And what we end up finding out here is that in this DC Rebirth, landscape, that Malcolm Duncan has essentially gotten rid of his powers. That for the most part, he just didn't really like having them. He didn't really know how to control them. But the basis behind him getting rid of his powers was actually the result of his experience with a villain named Mammoth, who was part of the Fearsome Five. Now, the Fearsome Five was a team that was introduced back in the 1970s, I think, maybe in the 1980s. I think they were a new Teen Titans group, but they were the arch enemies, or at least one of the many arch enemies that the Teen Titans had. But it was literally just 5 of them. Originally, they were led by a villain named Dr. Light, but eventually Dr. Light was defeated, and the villain that we'll see here, Simon, took over the team. So it was basically grabbing the original Fearsome Five from classic DC and then bringing it over into DC Rebirth, and then essentially saying, here's everything you remember with regards to the Fearsome Five and how they function. Now, with the whole idea of Meta Solutions, they're basically an organization that exists for the purpose of either giving people powers or taking powers away from people. But a lot of it really seems to be willing. In terms of people who lose their powers, they go there and say, look, I don't know how to use my powers effectively. Meta Solutions will offer them the opportunity to train on how to use their powers, and if they refuse, then Meta Solutions will just take their powers away if that's the option that they want. It's literally you going there and saying, look, I have these crazy powers, you know, I have telepathy, but I can't control what minds I read. I don't want to have to worry about it, and Meta Solutions will take those powers from you. Now, of course, that begs the question, where do those powers go? Hence the nefarious side of Meta Solutions. But Malcolm Duncan had basically given him up, and, you know, given up his sound manipulation abilities, and has brought Karen Beecher there as well. Now, of course, the two of them were a couple. They have a daughter together, so on and so forth. But the idea is that Karen has powers of, you know, super speed and strength and so on, but she can also increase and decrease her size. And so the idea is that she's considering giving up her abilities as well. Now, of course, the person who's running the show here at Meta Solutions is a guy named Simon. And this is kind of a funny thing because there was one video that I did with the Titans. I don't remember if it was like the annual or if it was a one-shot or something like that, but I kind of ran over this character of Simon. I didn't realize he was as old as he is. Simon goes all the way back to like 1970 something, and he actually got his powers from Trigon. It was basically Trigon kind of messing with his head and giving him like these insane powers of telepathy and telekinesis and so on. Now, I believe that he's been reworked over the years, but as far as I'm aware, this goes back to that original origin. Now, it doesn't tell us, it doesn't like have anything to do with Trigon in the story. It's never referenced, never talked about. But the indication, especially when he's dealing with Omen, dealing with Lilith Clay, the Titan's resident psychic, when he's talking to her, he actually kind of talks about how his powers are unlimited, more or less, which would indicate that he's still very much rooted in the whole origin of Trigon, which they may or may not expand on at some future point in time. But again, right now the Titans are still kind of dealing with the idea that they are a team again, because remember, the Titans are kind of coming back together and remembering everything for the first time. They're remembering that they were a team at one point in time. Wally West, the classic Wally West, has reappeared, sort of awakened them to the truth of who they were before, and so they're basically kind of remembering what they're about. They're expanding on their own weaknesses and strengths. For example, when it comes to Garth, the original Aqualad, he's a guy that's been trained, by the Atlanteans in a multitude of different, styles of martial arts, some unique and some known across the world, whereas Lilith is a psychic, and so she's not really used to hand-to-hand combat, but she's learning hand-to-hand combat in the first place. When it comes to Donna Troy, traditionally in some form or fashion, basically created as a clone of Wonder Woman, depending on exactly how it is that they choose to do it, DC is still in the process of fleshing out her backstory, going through and essentially leading up to a point where they retell her origin again. Of course, there's also classic Wally West coming to grips with the fact that he's now, he's back, he's among his superhero friends, and trying to acclimate to this environment, to this world that he's in. Now, of course, again, for the character of Malcolm Duncan, while he's still at Meta Solutions, he actually has his flashback when he sees Mammoth. And Mammoth, again, as a member of the Fearsome Five, was a guy who almost killed Malcolm. And so with this whole thing, Malcolm initially kind of freaks out and takes off, because this is just PTSD. This is him kind of going back and remembering that moment when he was almost killed, and it's almost, completely overwhelming for him. And so in response to this, Lilith Clay, Omen basically picks up on the psychic backlash of Malcolm Duncan and his struggle to comprehend what's going on, and it draws the attention of the Titans themselves. Now, what this tells us is that there's a connection between the Titans and Malcolm. That's how we know he was a member of the team at one point along the line. These connections are formed and they never go away. Even if they just kind of sit in the background, even if they're never really used anymore, there's just still that connection that's there as part of the team. And that's really the way the Teen Titans always worked. I mean, when you had a psychic member on the team, they were very similar to how the Justice League worked, right? Like when the Justice League goes out on a mission and Martian Manhunter is part of the team, Martian Manhunter would be the psychic linchpin, which means that there would be like some major, that they would all get together and say, okay guys, look, there's all these major catastrophes going on. Each one of us will go out and deal with each one of these catastrophes, and Martian Manhunter will stay in the watchtower, and he'll be the guy that will keep us all connected, will know what the other person is doing. So if Wonder Woman's overwhelmed, or Superman's overwhelmed, or Batman's overwhelmed, the other members of the Justice League can respond. The psychics, regardless of who they are on the Teen Titans, and with Omen as part of the Titans, serves the exact same purpose. And so again, because of the fact that Malcolm had been part of the Titans at some point along the line, he's basically able, he's still kind of connected to them even on a psychological level. And so again, he basically explains everything that's going on with regards to Simon, with Meta Solutions, so on and so forth, and the Titans respond accordingly. Now again, when the Titans arrive here on the scene, they're immediately skeptical. And the reason why is because this is effectively the Fearsome Five that's basically come along and said, oh hey, we're doing good things here. We've reformed ourselves. We're not bad guys anymore. Some of us have given up our powers. Those of us who haven't have reformed ourselves, but we are on a mission of mercy. We are here for the purpose of training people to use their powers adequately. Now, this is kind of cool because this is actually the perfect ruse. If you are a bad guy, what better way to make yourself off as a good guy than to help other people? So again, it's a really cool kind of scenario here. I mean, it's absolutely great the way it really unfolds, and it really kind of begs the question, is it true? And in fact, Simon goes as far as to have Omen basically read his mind and say, am I telling the truth or am I lying? And Omen confirms that he's essentially telling the truth. And so because of this, the Titans, while they are a little bit skeptical, ultimately end up leaving it with Karen, just because of the fact that, Karen learns about Mammoth having almost killed Malcolm and then just kind of takes off on Meta Solutions. But the crazy thing about this is that Meta Solutions is almost like a drug, right? Like, I mean, for Karen Beecher, she was never really able to control her powers. She was never really able to control her abilities. And so being offered the opportunity to be able to do that, to basically have the best of both worlds, to have her powers and be able to control them, is almost like a drug that she can't resist. And so because of this, she's still very much in flux. She's still very much in turmoil, trying to figure out what direction she should choose. Now, with the rest of the Titans sitting down and really kind of analyzing everything that's going on with regards to the Fearsome Five, this is when we get a little more of an explanation on Roy Harper. Now, in truth, if you've been reading DC Comics for any real measure of time, what you see here is not anything you didn't already know. But for new fans, this is all new stuff. Roy Harper was the original sidekick of Green Arrow Oliver Queen. And in the story Snowbirds Don't Fly, as part of Neil Adams and Dennis O'Neil's run on his character, they basically started delving into more realistic things. And one of the things that they revealed was that Roy Harper was addicted to drugs. Now, of course, this led into this sort of reformation for his character, and DC was able to delve into the real psychological impact that the actions that Roy had on not just himself, as well as, the other members of the superhero community and those who were closest to him, especially Green Arrow. What this did is it allowed DC to kind of go forward and focus a little more on things. But the argument that Roy Harper makes is that where he was able to clean himself up, it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in a matter matter of weeks, that a few weeks ago, the Fearsome Five were facing off against the Justice League. A group as evil as they were, as bad as they were, doesn't just suddenly reform overnight. It takes time. It takes a lot of rebuilding. It takes people to talk to. It takes friends. It takes all different kinds of things to overcome this kind of scenario. And so immediately, while Roy Harper is like, look, I can't prove it, if we go through and start poking around, I can almost guarantee you, we're gonna find that the Fearsome Five are up to no good. They are basically bad guys. And that's exactly what happens here. But that's why this is so cool, right? Like, that's why the Titans are so cool. And this is one of the things that we talked about in our Teen Titans video. You know, in our Teen Titans video, we talked about the idea that the Teen Titans serve the purpose of kind of creating this connection with a lot of teenagers in terms of teenage struggles and, you know, love and romance and so on and so forth. With the Titans, it's more adult-oriented themes. It's the idea of their past experiences as Teen Titans molding with how they view the world as adults. And then from there, sitting down and saying, okay, how can we reshape and how can we tell these stories in a way that make them tangible so that those people who were reading Teen Titans as teenagers can carry that experience on and basically kind of continue the trend as if there was no stopping point. They saw the world as teenagers, now they see the world as adults. The Teen Titans, or the Titans here, they saw the world as teenagers when they were Teen Titans, now they see the world as adults when they're Titans, and the theme, the connection remains between the reader and the comic. And so it's really kind of cool in terms of how all that comes together and in terms of how all that works. Now, of course, with classic Wally West and Dick Grayson kind of poking around meta solutions, things progress exactly as we would expect them to. The Fearsome Five basically make their appearance. They're like, haha, yes, of course we're bad guys. And Mammoth shows up. Now, of course, one thing to keep in mind with Mammoth is despite his, brute strength, his incredible durability, he was never the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, the engine was running, but there was nobody behind the wheel. And with his character, it's still very much the same way. He's not a thinking man's villain. He is a go here, do that kind of villain. He's really good at doing what he's told, and that's really about it. The other half of this is that when Malcolm, goes to get a drink for himself and Karen back at Titan's Tower, when he comes back, he ultimately finds that Karen's gone, which of course leads to the idea that Karen is basically racing off to go, join the Titans and try to keep them from being killed and so on and so forth. Now, of course, this eventually leads to Karen making her appearance, as well as the remainder of the Titans, Roy Harper and Garth and Donna Troy and Lilith, basically rescuing Dick Grayson and Wally West. But this is when we start to get into the different elements of the Fearsome Five, what they're capable of. Jinx lives up to her namesake, probability manipulation, able to basically manipulate the likelihood that something bad will happen. In this instance, it's the necessity of being able to access something. Well, she can manipulate probability so that the lock simply just won't unlock, or whatever the case may be. It's one of those weird kind of magics where it borderlines on reality warping. It's a very difficult power to write, and characters like that aren't written very often because it's a very fine line between I'm going to make it so that the door is unlikely to unlock, or you're unlikely to win the lottery, and I'm going to manipulate reality so that you do win. Again, it's a very fine line between how those things work. The fact remains here, with regards to Simon, again, kind of hitting back home at this idea of him, his relation to Trigon, the unlimited, unbridled power of his telepathy and telekinesis, this comes home to roost when he's facing off against Omen. And as powerful as he is, he says, look, like, I can sense how powerful you are, and you're a very, very powerful psychic, very powerful telepath, but my levels are unlimited. I just keep going and going and going. And so because of that, this again hits home at the idea that Simon's power is not just a result of, some experiment or something like that. It's a result of him gaining his abilities from some godlike being, which of course, in the pre-crisis landscape turned out to be Trigon, or maybe it was a post-crisis, I can't remember. But regardless, he got his powers from Trigon. Now, of course, with regards to Karen jumping in, Karen faces off against various members of the Fearsome Five and actually holds her own, takes every last one of them out, and uses all of her powers to do so. The problem with this is that she's ultimately defeated by Simon, but instead of simply just knocking her out, what he does is he actually strips away a section of her memory. He literally just takes this portion of her mind away, and the result is that she does not know who Malcolm Duncan is, and she does not remember that she has a child. All she knows is that she's just a woman in the world trying to make her way and that kind of a thing. So again, it really shows us the impact that people with psychic powers have on those who cannot defend against them. But really, the big kind of cliffhanger to this, the big kind of cliffhanger to this story comes in the fact that Wally West and Dick Grayson had actually managed to hack the computer files of Meta Solutions and found out that they were one of a multitude of corporations that are being backed by a group called Hive. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that Hive actually plays a role within the Deathstroke landscape, which is why why this is effectively a prelude to the Lazarus contract, because Hive is an organization that really just kind of looked at the idea of world domination and artificial human evolution, and what better way to implement artificial human evolution than to take and give people superpowers than to literally be the one who decides who gets to be God and who doesn't. And so again, it's really kind of a cool scenario with regards to how that unfolds. But what we also know is that one of Slade Wilson's sons, Grant, had somehow been involved in Hive and ended up dying in the process. We don't know how far back that goes. We don't really know what his involvement was. We simply just know that was the case. But what this does is it creates a linchpin between the Deathstroke comics and the Titans and Teen Titans comics and sets the stage for the main Lazarus contract story. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.